A federal judge in Florida has imposed a nearly $1 million fine against former President Donald Trump and one of his lawyers. The sanction was for filing a, quote, frivolous lawsuit against Hillary Clinton and others. The judge ordered Trump and his lawyer, Alina Habba, to cover the legal costs for Clinton and the 30 other defendants linked to the case. The lawsuit claimed Clinton and others tried to undermine the 2016 presidential election.
Okay, so this is a story about consequences finally catching up with someone who thought the legal system was just another tool for attacking his enemies. A conservative federal appeals court has just upheld nearly $1 million in sanctions against Donald Trump and his lawyer for filing what judges called a frivolous and abusive lawsuit against Hillary Clinton. And here's the part that should really get your attention. If Trump refuses to pay or tries to stall, the court has given Clinton's team the green light to go after his assets. We are talking about liens on his properties. We are talking about garnishment of his income. We are talking about the possibility of frozen accounts and forced sales. The legal system that Trump has been trying to weaponize against his enemies is now weaponizing itself against him. And it could not be happening to a more deserving person. But before we go any further, real quick, let's be honest, you can't really trust mainstream media anymore. That's why we built Pump Politics, to bring you real stories, real context, and no corporate spin. If you want to stay ahead of the headlines, join our free newsletter. We'll send the news straight to your inbox every day. Just click the link in the description to join. And if you just want to support what we're doing, join us. Be part of the community that actually cares about the truth. All right, let's get back to the video. Let me explain exactly what happened, because this ruling is devastating on multiple levels. Back in 2022, Trump filed a sprawling racketeering lawsuit against Hillary Clinton and dozens of other defendants. He claimed they had conspired against him in connection with the Russia investigation. He threw in everyone he could think of: Clinton, James Comey, former FBI officials, the Democratic National Committee, law firms. It was essentially a greatest hits of Trump grievances dressed up as a legal complaint. And from the beginning, legal experts said the case was garbage. It was not based on legitimate legal theories. It was not supported by actual evidence. It was Trump using the court system to harass people he did not like and to generate headlines. The case was thrown out. That was expected. But the judge went further. She imposed sanctions on Trump and his lawyer, Alina Habba, for filing such a frivolous lawsuit. Sanctions are penalties courts impose when lawyers or parties abuse the legal process. They are supposed to deter people from wasting judicial resources and harassing opponents through baseless litigation. The judge found that Trump's lawsuit was exactly that kind of abuse.
Nearly $1 million in sanctions. That's what a federal judge is ordering former President Trump and one of his lawyers to pay. It's over a lawsuit they filed against Hillary Clinton, former top Justice Department officials, and several others, alleging that the nearly 36 defendants conspired against Trump in the 2016 campaign. For more on all of this, I want to bring in CNN legal analyst Elliot Williams. Review of this lawsuit. What was your reaction?
Well, first off, I clerked for Judge Middlebrooks in a past life, maybe 20 years ago. And so, I've seen his opinions over the years. This was a very remarkable opinion. And I think there's a lot of focus on sort of the bombast and the, Trump versus the law.
She ordered Trump and Habba to pay nearly $1 million, going about $937,989 to be exact, to compensate the defendants for the legal fees they had to spend defending against this nonsense. Trump appealed the sanctions. Of course he did. Trump appeals everything. His entire legal strategy is delay, 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 and hope something changes before he has to face consequences. But the 11th Circuit Court of Appeals, a conservative court with multiple Trump-appointed judges, and just unanimously affirmed the sanctions. They found that Trump's lawsuit was frivolous. They cited his pattern of misusing the courts. They said the sanctions were appropriate given the abusive nature of the litigation. This was not a close call. This was not liberal judges punishing Trump for political reasons. This was conservative judges looking at the facts and concluding that Trump had abused the legal system and needed to face consequences. And here is where it gets really interesting. The sanctions order makes Trump and Habba jointly and severally liable. That legal term means Clinton's team can go after either of them, or both of them, for the full amount. If Habba cannot pay, they can pursue Trump for everything. If Trump tries to hide behind his lawyer, they can still come after him directly. And if neither of them pays voluntarily, which seems likely given Trump's history of stiffing people, Clinton's team can start using the enforcement tools that courts provide for collecting judgments. Those tools include liens on property. Once you have a judgment against someone, you can file a lien on their real estate. That lien attaches to the property and has to be satisfied before the property can be sold or refinanced. Trump has properties all over the country. Clinton's team could potentially file liens on Trump Tower or Mar-a-Lago or any of his other holdings. Those liens would effectively freeze those assets. Trump could not easily sell them or use them as collateral without dealing with the judgment first. The tools also include garnishment. If Trump has income from his businesses or from any other source, that income can potentially be garnished to satisfy the judgment. The courts can order money to be taken before it even reaches Trump's accounts. And if Trump tries to hide assets or move money around to avoid paying, that creates its own legal problems. Courts take a very dim view of people who try to evade judgments and can impose additional penalties for that kind of behavior. Now, this nearly $1 million sanction might seem like pocket change for someone who claims to be a billionaire. But here's the thing. It does not exist in isolation. Trump is facing hundreds of millions of dollars in other civil judgments. The E. Jean Carroll defamation case, the New York fraud case, legal fees from multiple criminal proceedings. When you start stacking all of these judgments together, and when creditors start filing liens across multiple properties, the financial pressure becomes enormous. Cash flow gets squeezed. Credit becomes harder to obtain. The ability to operate a business empire depends on financial flexibility, and that flexibility disappears when liens and judgments start piling up. So in this video, we are going to break down exactly what this ruling means and how the enforcement process works. We are going to look at how judgments turn into liens and how liens can effectively freeze assets. We are going to examine Trump's pattern of abusing the courts and how it keeps backfiring. And we are going to talk about what happens next, because this is not just about one lawsuit. This is about whether the legal system can actually hold Trump accountable when he uses it as a weapon. Let us get into it. All right, so let us really dig into what happened with this lawsuit and why the sanctions are so significant. Because this is not just about money. It is about the courts finally saying enough is enough when it comes to Trump using litigation as a harassment tool. The lawsuit Trump filed in 2022 was extraordinary in its scope and its audacity. He sued Hillary Clinton. He sued James Comey. He sued former FBI officials, including Andrew McCabe and Peter Strzok. He sued the Democratic National Committee. He sued law firms. He sued researchers who investigated Russian interference. He threw in basically everyone he blamed for the Russia investigation and claimed they had all conspired against him in a vast racketeering enterprise. He was using RICO, the Racketeer Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act, which is normally used against organized crime. Trump was essentially claiming that his political opponents were a criminal enterprise that had targeted him. Legal experts looked at this complaint and immediately recognized it as frivolous. RICO has specific legal requirements. You have to show an enterprise engaged in a pattern of racketeering activity. You have to show predicate acts that qualify as racketeering. You cannot just list everyone you are mad at and claim they conspired against you. The legal theories Trump was advancing did not work. The factual allegations did not support the claims. It was a political document masquerading as a lawsuit designed to generate headlines and harass opponents rather than to actually win in court. The case was assigned to Judge Donald Middlebrooks in the Southern District of Florida. Middlebrooks is not a liberal activist judge. He was appointed by Bill Clinton but has a reputation as a fair and careful jurist, and he was not impressed by what Trump filed. He dismissed the case, finding that it failed to state viable legal claims, but he did not stop there. He also found that the lawsuit was so baseless and so abusive that sanctions were warranted. The sanctions order that Middlebrooks issued was scathing. He found that Trump and Haba had filed a complaint that was not warranted by existing law or by a good faith argument for changing the law. He found that the factual allegations were not supported by evidence. He found that the lawsuit was filed for improper purposes, to harass defendants and to use the court system as a political weapon. And he ordered Trump and Haba to pay the defendants' legal fees, which totaled nearly $1 million. The language Middlebrooks used in his sanctions order was notable. He specifically cited Trump's pattern of misusing the courts. This was not an isolated incident. Trump has a long history of filing baseless lawsuits and making frivolous legal arguments. He uses litigation as a business strategy to intimidate opponents and to delay accountability. Middlebrooks was saying that this pattern of abuse had to stop and that courts needed to impose real consequences to deter future misconduct. Trump and Haba appealed to the 11th Circuit. This is the federal appeals court that covers Florida and other southeastern states. It has a conservative reputation. Several of the judges were appointed by Trump himself. If there was an appeals court that might be sympathetic to Trump's arguments, this would be it. and the 11th Circuit looked at the case and unanimously affirmed the sanctions. All 3 judges on the panel agreed the sanctions were appropriate, the lawsuit was frivolous, Trump had abused the judicial process. The appeals court's opinion emphasized the same points Middlebrooks had made. The lawsuit lacked legal merit. The factual allegations were not supported. The case appeared designed to harass rather than to vindicate legitimate legal rights. And Trump's history of abusing the courts made sanctions particularly appropriate. The 11th Circuit was not breaking new ground. It was affirming that the district court had correctly applied existing law to Trump's misconduct. Now let us talk about what happens next, because this is where it gets really interesting from a financial perspective. Trump now owes nearly $1 million to the defendants in this case. He and Haba are jointly and severally liable, meaning the full amount can be collected from either of them or from both. If Trump does not pay voluntarily, and his history suggests he will not, Clinton's team can start using legal tools to collect. The first step is usually to try to identify assets. Judgment creditors can conduct discovery, asking questions and demanding documents to find out what property and income the debtor has. They can subpoena bank records, they can examine business interests. The goal is to find assets that can be used to satisfy the judgment. Once assets are identified, liens can be filed. A lien is a legal claim against property. When you have a judgment against someone, you can file a lien on their real estate. That lien attaches to the property and creates a cloud on the title. The property cannot be sold without dealing with the lien. It cannot be refinanced without satisfying or subordinating the lien. The lien effectively freezes the asset. The owner still technically owns it, but they cannot freely dispose of it. Trump has extensive real estate holdings, properties in New York, Mar-a-Lago in Florida, golf courses around the country. Clinton's team could potentially file liens on any of these properties. Multiple liens from multiple judgments could stack up, creating a web of encumbrances that makes it extremely difficult to operate a real estate business. Lenders do not want to provide financing when properties are clouded by judgment liens. Buyers do not want to purchase properties when the title is uncertain. Garnishment is another tool. If Trump has income from his businesses or from other sources, that income can potentially be garnished. A court can order whoever is paying Trump to instead send some or all of that money to the judgment creditor. This can include business income, licensing fees, any regular payments Trump receives. Garnishment takes money before Trump even gets his hands on it. And here's the thing. This nearly $1 million sanction is just one judgment among many. Trump owes approximately $83 million from the E. Jean Carroll defamation case. He owes hundreds of millions from the New York fraud case, though that is being appealed. He has massive legal fees from his various criminal cases. When you add all of this up, the financial pressure becomes enormous. Each judgment gives creditors tools to go after his assets. Each lien makes his properties harder to use. The cumulative effect could be devastating to his business operations. Okay, so let us break this down into what you really need to understand about this sanctions ruling and what it means for Trump's finances and his pattern of abusing the legal system. Because this is not just about one lawsuit, it is about consequences finally catching up with someone who has treated courts as weapons for decades. First point, the ruling confirms that Trump filed a frivolous lawsuit designed to harass his opponents. This is not my characterization. This is what the courts found. Both the district court and the appeals court concluded that Trump's RICO case against Clinton had no legal merit. It was not a close call. It was not a legitimate lawsuit that happened to fail. It was an abuse of the legal process, using courts to attack political enemies rather than to vindicate actual legal rights. When judges use words like frivolous and abuse and harassment, they are making findings about intent. They are saying Trump knew or should have known this lawsuit was garbage and filed it anyway. Second point, the sanctions are personally devastating even if the dollar amount seems manageable. Nearly $1 million is a lot of money for most people. For someone who claims to be a billionaire, it might seem like pocket change, but this judgment does not exist in isolation. Trump is facing hundreds of millions in other judgments. He has massive legal fees from multiple proceedings. His businesses have their own financial pressures, and every judgment gives creditors new tools to go after his assets. The cumulative effect of stacking judgments and liens can be far greater than the sum of the individual amounts. Third point, joint and several liability means Alina Habba is also on the hook. Trump's lawyer is now personally liable for nearly $1 million because she signed her name to this frivolous lawsuit. If Trump does not pay, or cannot pay, the plaintiffs can pursue Habba for the full amount. This has implications for Trump's ability to find lawyers willing to represent him in the future. Attorneys have to consider whether working for Trump might result in personal financial liability when he asks them to file dubious lawsuits. The sanctions send a message to the legal community. Enabling Trump's abuse of the courts has consequences. Fourth point, the enforcement tools available to judgment creditors are powerful. Liens on real estate, garnishment of income, discovery to identify hidden assets. These are not theoretical possibilities. They are standard collection mechanisms that creditors use every day. Clinton's team can file liens on Trump's properties. They can garnish payments he receives. They can examine his finances to find assets. If Trump tries to hide money or transfer assets to avoid the judgment, that creates additional legal problems. Courts take a very dim view of debtors who try to evade their obligations. Fifth point, this ruling fits into a broader pattern of Trump's legal offensives backfiring. The Clinton lawsuit was supposed to harass and embarrass his enemies. Instead, it resulted in nearly $1 million in sanctions against him. His tariff policies are being challenged and courts are skeptical. His revenge prosecutions have been thrown out. His attempts to claim special privileges in the Mar-a-Lago case were rejected by appellate courts. Over and over, Trump tries to use the legal system as a weapon, and over it boomerangs back on him. The courts that he tries to manipulate end up imposing consequences on him instead. Sixth point, this could be the beginning of real financial pressure if judgments keep stacking up. One lien on one property is manageable. But what happens when you have liens from the Carroll case and the New York fraud case and this sanctions case and whatever comes next? What happens when creditors start pursuing garnishment of business income? What happens when lenders become reluctant to provide financing because of all the encumbrances on Trump's properties? The financial squeeze can become very real very quickly when multiple judgments are being enforced simultaneously. So where does this leave us? With Trump facing a court-ordered penalty that he cannot easily escape. The appeals process has run its course. The 11th Circuit has affirmed the sanctions. Trump could try to appeal to the Supreme Court, but there is no reason to think they would take the case. Sanctions for frivolous litigation are routine matters that do not typically warrant Supreme Court review. So Trump either pays or he faces collection efforts. And given his history of stiffing people, of refusing to pay what he owes, the collection efforts are probably coming. Clinton's team now has a powerful tool. They have a nearly $1 million judgment that has been affirmed on appeal. They can start the enforcement process, they can file liens, they can conduct discovery, they can pursue garnishment, they can make Trump's financial life significantly more complicated, and they can do all of this while other creditors from other cases do the same thing. The irony is rich. Trump filed this lawsuit to harass Hillary Clinton, to drag her through legal proceedings, to generate negative headlines about her, to use the courts as a political weapon. And now that same lawsuit has resulted in a judgment against him that his former opponent can use to go after his assets. The weapon he tried to use against her has been turned around and aimed at him. That is what happens when you abuse the legal system. Eventually, the system pushes back. I will be back with more updates as the collection process unfolds, and as we learn more about what Clinton's team decides to do with this judgment, because nearly $1 million is real money, and the enforcement tools available are real tools. And Trump's pattern of refusing to pay what he owes suggests this is going to become a fight. The question is whether the courts will follow through, whether the liens will be filed and the garnishments will be ordered and the consequences will actually be imposed. Stay tuned.